One weekend morning, while I was sitting inside my own home, a sudden knock interrupted the silence. A detective and a police officer stood at my door. "Sir, we need to speak with your wife." I told them she had stepped out. But the detective's expression instantly changed. He moved closer and lowered his voice. "Take your daughter and leave this house today. Your wife is an extremely dangerous person." What he said next made my face turn pale. "Welcome to revenge, Dad. And before this story goes any further, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments. You would be surprised how many people just like you are sitting with this exact same feeling right now. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational value. Any resemblance to specific names or locations is coincidental. The lesson, however, is very real. I used to think that by the time a man reached 65, the most frightening things in life were already behind him. The sleepless nights worrying about payroll, the decades of building something from nothing, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until your hands ached and your back gave out. And you finally looked around and thought, yes, this is enough. This is what I worked for. I never thought the most dangerous thing I would ever face would be sitting across from me at the breakfast table every single morning. My name is Wayne Callahan. I am 65 years old, and I have lived in Sacramento, California for the better part of 40 years. I built a small investment firm from the ground up, the kind of company that never made the headlines, but kept good people employed and kept my daughter in college and kept a roof over our heads through 2 recessions and one market crash that nearly took everything I had. I am not a wealthy man by any grand measure, but I worked hard, saved carefully, and by the time I turned 60, I had built something worth protecting. A portfolio, 2 properties, and a retirement account that totaled just over $5 million. More important than any of that, I had Ruby. My daughter was 24 years old and living in Los Angeles, working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm downtown. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and every time she called me on Sunday evenings, I felt like the luckiest man alive. After her mother passed, Ruby and I held each other up through the kind of grief that hollows you out and leaves you wondering how you are supposed to keep going. We figured it out together. We always did. That was before Colleen. I met Colleen Marsh at a community charity event in Sacramento, about 2 years before that Monday morning in November. She was standing near the registration table, wearing a navy blue blouse, her hair pinned back neatly, and she smiled at me, the way people do when they are genuinely glad to see you, not just being polite. We talked for 2 hours. She listened. She asked real questions. She laughed at the right moments and grew serious at the right ones, and by the end of the evening, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt seen. We were married 8 months later. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, and I remember standing at the altar thinking that maybe at 65, a man could still be surprised by life in the best possible way. Ruby was there. She hugged me and told me she was happy for me. But even that day, even through her smile, I caught something in her eyes that I chose not to examine too carefully. A hesitation. A question she was not ready to ask out loud. I should have asked it for her. The Monday morning that changed everything started the way most of my mornings did. I woke before 6, brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen, while the Sacramento sky turned from black to gray outside the window, and sat at the table with the newspaper I still had delivered out of old habit. Colleen had risen even earlier than usual. She told me she needed to run out for a few things before the stores got busy. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her keys, and was gone before 7. I noticed in the vague way you notice things you do not want to examine that she had not said exactly where she was going. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when the knock came. It was not a casual knock. It was the kind of knock that lands with weight, deliberate and unhurried, the kind that tells you whoever is on the other side of the door is not leaving without being heard. I set my mug down and walked to the front door, and when I opened it, 2 men in dark coats were standing on my porch in the early morning chill. The taller one reached into his inside pocket and produced a badge. Federal. His name, he said, was Detective Marcus Webb. He was with the FBI field office in Sacramento. The second man stood slightly behind him and said nothing, his eyes moving methodically across the driveway, the street, the neighbors' houses. "Mr. Callahan," Webb said. His voice was even and low. "We need to speak with your wife." My chest tightened before my mind could catch up with why. "She stepped out about an hour ago," I said. "Went to pick up a few things. I can call her if you need." Something shifted in Webb's face. Not panic, nothing so visible as that, But the set of his jaw changed, and he glanced at his partner with an expression that passed between them too quickly for me to read. Then he looked back at me, stepped forward slightly, and lowered his voice until it was nearly below the threshold of the morning air. "Mr. Callahan, I need you to listen to me very carefully." His eyes held mine without blinking. "Is there anyone else inside the house right now?" "No," I said. "Just me." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "We have been conducting a federal investigation for the past 18 months. I cannot give you every detail right now, and I need you to remain calm when I tell you what I am about to tell you." He paused just long enough for my heart to start knocking against my ribs. "The woman you married is extremely dangerous. We believe she poses a direct and serious threat to your safety and to your financial security." The words landed like something physical. My hand tightened on the doorframe without me telling it to. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my throat close around whatever I had been about to say. "I do not understand," I managed. My voice came out thinner than I intended. "Colleen, you are talking about my wife." "Yes, sir." Webb reached into a leather folio he was carrying and withdrew a thick envelope sealed and heavy. He pressed it into my hands with both of his. "Everything we can legally share with you at this stage is in there. I need you to take this somewhere private away from this house and read it carefully." He held my gaze. "Do not read it here. Do not change your behavior toward her in any way when she returns. Do not let her know we came." My fingers curled around the envelope. It felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "Why?" I asked. The words scraped out of me. "Why are you telling me this now? If you have been watching her for 18 months, why are you only at my door today?" Webb's expression did not waver, but something behind his eyes acknowledged the weight of the question. "Because we are close," he said quietly, "and because we needed to make sure you were protected before we move forward. We will be in contact." He took a half step back toward the porch steps. "Be careful, Mr. Callahan. Please." I stood in my doorway and watched the two of them walk back down the front path to an unmarked sedan parked at the curb. No lights, no agency markings. Webb did not look back. The engine started, and within seconds the car had moved down the street and disappeared into the gray Sacramento morning fog. I stood there for a long moment. The cold air pressed against my face and hands. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the block. The newspaper was still sitting on the kitchen table next to my half-finished coffee. Everything looked exactly the way it had looked 20 minutes ago. The same porch, the same driveway, the same quiet suburban street I had lived on for years. But something had broken open that could not be closed again. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. The paper was thick and slightly textured, the kind used for official documents. My name was printed on the front in plain block letters. No return address, no agency logo. From inside the house, the faint scent of the herbal tea Colleen had brewed for me before she left still drifted through the open door. The same tea she prepared for me every single morning. The same tea I drank every night before bed. The same tea I had thanked her for dozens of times because it seemed like such a small and loving thing. I had not yet opened the envelope, but standing there on that porch holding it with both hands to keep them from trembling, I already understood that whatever was inside it was going to rewrite every moment of the past 2 years. I stepped back inside, closed the door behind me, and picked up my car keys. I drove without thinking about where I was going. My hands found the steering wheel out of muscle memory, and my foot found the accelerator, and I moved through the quiet Sacramento streets the way a man moves when his body is still functioning, but his mind has gone somewhere else entirely. 3 miles from the house, I turned into the parking lot of a grocery store that would not open for another 2 hours. I pulled into a space at the far end, away from the road, away from the few early morning delivery trucks idling near the loading dock. I cut the engine. The silence in the car was so complete I could hear my own breathing. I sat there for a full minute without touching the envelope. Just sat there with it resting on the passenger seat beside me, this thick, heavy thing that Detective Webb had pressed into my hands with the gravity of a man delivering a verdict. The morning sky outside was pale gray, the kind of Sacramento November morning that never quite decides whether it wants to be cold or merely cool, and the parking lot lights were still on, even though dawn had already started to bleed in at the edges. Finally, I picked it up. My fingers were not entirely steady as I worked the seal open. I noticed that the way you notice small physical details when everything else is too large to process. My hands, which had been steady through 40 years of business negotiations and market downturns, And the worst morning of my life when the doctor told me my wife had 6 months were trembling slightly as I pulled the contents free. The first page stopped me cold. It was a photograph, or rather, 3 photographs arranged side by side on a single sheet of paper, each one labeled with a different name beneath it. The woman in all 3 photographs was unmistakably the same person, the same bone structure, the same set of the eyes, the same way of holding her chin slightly elevated as though she were always prepared to be looked at. The name beneath the first photograph read Sandra Reeves, Texas. The second read Michelle Parra, Nevada. The third read Karen Wolf, New York. And beneath all 3 a 4th label in bold type, current identity in use, Colleen Marsh, Sacramento, California. My chest cracked open like something had driven a fist straight through it. I pressed my back against the seat and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, slow and even, out through the mouth. The way the cardiologist had taught me years ago when my blood pressure first started climbing. I did it 3 times before I trusted myself to keep reading. The pages that followed read like a case study in systematic destruction. Webb's team had documented a pattern so precise, so deliberate in its execution, that it could only have been refined over years of practice. Colleen, or whatever her real name was, targeted widowed men between the ages of 60 and 75. Men with assets between $3 and $10 million. Men whose adult children lived at least 2 hours away. Men who were, in Webb's clinical language, socially isolated following bereavement, and therefore statistically more susceptible to rapid emotional attachment. Men exactly like me. She would enter their lives through community events or volunteer organizations, present herself as warm and attentive and uncomplicated, and begin what the file described as a long-form trust-building campaign. Within 6 to 10 months, she would have secured a marriage. Within the first year of marriage, she would begin what the medical reports called a systematic health deterioration protocol, introducing trace amounts of arsenic into the target's daily food or beverage routine. The dosage, the file noted, was always carefully calibrated, enough to cause progressive fatigue, cognitive slowing, and muscle weakness. Not enough to trigger the panels run during a standard annual physical. I had to read that last sentence twice before it fully registered. Not enough to trigger the panels run during a standard annual physical. My mind lurched backward through the past 14 months like a man stumbling through a darkened house. The fatigue that had crept up on me so gradually, I had attributed it to age. The mornings I woke feeling like I had not slept at all. The afternoons when I sat down to review financial reports and found the numbers blurring in ways they never had before. The 3 separate occasions I had driven to an appointment and arrived uncertain of how I had gotten there. I had told Colleen about every single one of those episodes. And every time she had listened with such tender, practiced concern, she would reach across the table and cover my hand with hers. She would say gently but consistently that perhaps I was pushing myself too hard, that perhaps my mind was not quite as sharp as it used to be, that perhaps it was time to let her help more with the financial paperwork, the business accounts, the things that tired me out. I had thanked her for it. I pressed my fist against my mouth and stared through the windshield at the empty parking lot, my eyes burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the morning light. The file described the prior victims in careful anonymized language. 3 men across 3 different states. None of them had died, but all 3 had suffered significant and lasting neurological effects from prolonged arsenic exposure. All 3 had lost substantial financial assets during the marriage through a combination of forged documents, unauthorized transfers, and fabricated estate instruments. All 3 had been left, in the file's words, unable to fully recover either their health or their financial standing. I thought about those men. I did not know their names, but I knew their mornings. I knew the particular exhaustion of wondering whether your own mind was failing you. I knew the shame of it, the quiet terror of it, the way it made you grip the people closest to you a little tighter, because you were afraid of what you might lose next. I knew now that their fear had not been the natural fear of aging. It had been a symptom of something being done to them deliberately, 1 cup of tea at a time. The final page of the document was a handwritten note from Webb, clipped to the back with a small metal fastener. It read, "Subject is not operating alone. Network investigation ongoing. Do not alter behavior. We will contact you within 48 hours. I folded the note carefully and held it in both hands. Outside, a single crow landed on the asphalt. 10 feet from my car, looked directly at me through the windshield, with one bright black eye, then lifted and was gone. My phone buzzed against the center console. I looked down at the screen, a text from Colleen. "Honey, I'm back home. I picked up that new herbal blend from the health store, the one the woman recommended for circulation and energy. I'll brew you a fresh pot when you get back. Drive safe." My stomach turned over so violently I had to press my palm flat against it. I stared at the message for a long moment, at the easy warmth of it, at the small, careful kindness of it, and felt something shift permanently inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder and more deliberate than anger. I typed back with steady hands. "Thanks, sweetheart. On my way." I set the phone face down on the seat, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot toward home, toward the woman who had brewed me tea every morning for 14 months, toward the house where I had thanked her for taking such good care of me. I drove the 3 miles back without the radio on, without the heat on, without anything on at all, just the sound of the engine and the sound of my own breathing and the weight of everything I now knew settling into my bones like something that had always been there waiting to be found. The moment I turned my key in the front door lock, I made myself a promise. Whatever I was feeling, the nausea, the fury building, slow and volcanic somewhere beneath my sternum, the grief that kept ambushing me in waves every time I thought about those 14 months of morning tea, none of it could show on my face. Not a flicker, not a tremor in my jaw, not a single extra beat of hesitation before I stepped inside. Webb had been explicit: do not change your behavior, do not let her know. And I understood with a clarity that surprised me that the next few days would demand from me the most sustained performance of my life. I was 65 years old. I had buried my wife. I had held my company together through a financial crisis that took 3 of my competitors under. I had sat across boardroom tables from men who wanted to take everything I had built and smiled at them while I protected it. I could do this. I pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of my own house. The smell hit me first. Herbal tea, sweet and faintly medicinal, curling through the front hallway the way it did every single morning. Before today, that smell had meant comfort to me, safety. The particular contentment of being cared for by someone who noticed the small things. Now, it moved through me like something cold and wrong, and I had to grip the door handle behind me for just a moment before I let it go. "Wayne, honey, you're back." Colleen's voice came from the kitchen, bright and warm. I heard the soft sound of a cabinet closing, the clink of ceramic against the counter. I was starting to wonder. "You were gone a while." "Just needed some air," I called back. My voice came out steady, easier than I expected. "Took a longer drive than I planned." I hung my coat on the hook by the door, set my keys on the entryway table, and walked into the kitchen. Colleen was standing at the counter in a cream-colored sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, pouring hot water from the kettle into a ceramic mug. She looked up when I came in and gave me the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind that had made me feel, for 2 solid years, like the luckiest man in any room. My stomach twisted so hard I almost pressed my hand against it. "Oh, sit down, she said, carrying the mug to the table and setting it in front of my usual chair. "I got this new blend from that little shop on J Street. The woman there said it's wonderful for circulation, better than that other one we've been using." She touched my shoulder as she moved past me, a light habitual gesture. "You've been looking tired lately, sweetheart. I worry about you." "I'm fine," I said. I sat down in my chair and looked at the mug. The tea was a pale amber color steam rising from the surface in thin, unhurried curls. "Just didn't sleep great." "You never do anymore." Colleen sat down across from me, cradling her own coffee cup in both hands, watching me with that expression I had always read as loving concern, the slight furrow between her brows, the careful attention in her eyes. "Wayne, I've been thinking, maybe we should make another appointment with Dr. Patterson. Your memory has been a little scattered lately, and I just think—" "My memory is fine, Colleen." I said it lightly with the easy, mild irritation of a man who has heard this suggestion one too many times. Not sharp enough to alarm her, just enough to sound like myself. She tilted her head slightly, her expression softening further. "I know you think so, honey. I just love you. I want to make sure we're taking care of you properly." I looked at her face across the table and felt something split quietly open inside my chest. Because here was the unbearable thing. The thing that the FBI file had not prepared me for. She was convincing. She was extraordinarily, heartbreakingly convincing. The warmth in her voice was perfectly pitched. The concern in her eyes was indistinguishable from the real thing. And somewhere beneath the fury and the nausea and the cold, clarifying shock of everything I now knew, there was a grief I had not anticipated. Grief for the woman I had believed she was. Grief for the 2 years I had spent building something I thought was real. I reached for the mug, wrapped both hands around it, and felt the heat seep into my palms. Then I stood up, carried it to the sink, and poured it out. "Think I'll stick with coffee this morning," I said, turning back to her with a half smile. "Stomach's a little off." Colleen watched me with an expression that shifted almost imperceptibly. Something moving behind her eyes there, and gone so fast I might have imagined it. Then she smiled again. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll put a fresh pot on." I sat back down and let her move around the kitchen, and I watched her the way you watch someone when you are no longer seeing what they want you to see, but what is actually there. I thought about the first time she had suggested helping with the business accounts. It was 4 months into the marriage, a Tuesday evening in February. I had been at the kitchen table with a stack of quarterly reports rubbing my eyes, and she had leaned over my shoulder and said so gently that I worked too hard that I should let her take some of the administrative burden off my plate, that she had always been good with numbers. I had been grateful. I thought about the family dinner at my cousin David's house in March 7 months ago. How Colleen had mentioned 3 separate times in that same warm, concerned voice that I had forgotten the name of David's youngest son. How she had laughed softly and patted my hand in front of everyone and said, "He does this now. It's sweet, really. He just needs a little reminding sometimes." How David had looked at me with something uncomfortably close to pity, and how I had laughed along, because what else do you do when your wife is describing your decline with such evident affection? She had been building a case. Every dinner, every casual mention to friends and family of my foggy memory, my scattered attention, my need for her management and oversight. She had been constructing a narrative brick by careful brick that Wayne Callahan was no longer fully capable of managing his own affairs, and I had helped her build it by never once questioning the architect. "Here you go." Colleen set a fresh mug of coffee in front of me, black the way I liked it, and sat back down across the table. "What do you want to do today? It's supposed to clear up by noon. We could take a walk along the river if you're feeling up to it." "Maybe," I said. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug and looked at her across the table. "Let me see how the morning goes." She smiled at me. I smiled back, and somewhere in my chest, behind the smile and the steady hands and the voice that came out exactly as it always had, something was hardening into a shape I had never felt before. Not rage, something quieter and more durable than rage. Purpose. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I slipped it out just far enough to read the screen without Colleen seeing. A text from a number I did not recognize. No area code. I knew no name attached. "When you are ready, drive to McKinley Park. Call Ruby first." I slid the phone back into my pocket, took a long sip of coffee, and set the mug down with a steady hand. "Actually," I said, "I just remembered I need to drop something off for a client. Shouldn't take more than an hour." Colleen looked up from her own cup. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No need." I was already pushing back from the table, already reaching for my jacket on the back of the chair. "You stay and relax. You've been running around all morning." She watched me with that warm, attentive expression. "Okay, honey, drive careful." "Always do," I said. I walked out the front door into the cool November air, got into my car, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands until my knuckles went white. Then I loosened my grip, one finger at a time, breathed out slowly, and reached for my phone to call my daughter. McKinley Park was quiet at that hour. A few joggers moved along the path that circled the rose garden, their breath making small clouds in the November air. A woman was pushing a stroller near the duck pond, her head down against the chill. I pulled into the parking area off Alhambra Boulevard, cut the engine, and sat for a moment watching a pair of mallards work their way along the edge of the water, with the unhurried confidence of creatures who own the place. Then I pulled out my phone and called my daughter. It rang twice. Ruby picked up on the third ring, and even in that single word, Dad, I could hear that she already knew something was wrong. Ruby had always been able to read me in ways her mother had, and no one else ever quite managed. Some children grow up learning to interpret the weather by the look of the sky. Ruby had grown up learning to interpret it by the sound of my voice. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. I was proud of how even I kept it. "You have a few minutes. I'm at my desk, but I can step out." A brief pause, the sound of a chair rolling back, footsteps, a door closing. Then her voice came back lower and more focused. Okay, I'm in the hallway. Dad, what's wrong? You sound... I need to tell you something. My throat tightened around the words. And I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything. Can you do that for me? A beat of silence, not the easy kind. Yes, she said. Go ahead. So I told her, all of it start to finish the way I had rehearsed it in my head on the drive over. The 2 men at the door, Webb's badge, the 18 months of federal surveillance, the envelope and what was inside it, the 3 photographs, the 3 names, the documented pattern of targeting and deterioration and financial destruction, the arsenic, the note at the end of the file, all of it in the careful, methodical way of a man who knows that if he stops to feel it, he will not be able to finish. Ruby did not say a word the entire time, but I could hear her breathing, and I could tell from the rhythm of it, shallow and controlled, the way she breathed when she was working very hard to hold herself together, that each piece of what I was telling her was landing the way a stone lands when you drop it into still water. Heavy, irreversible, spreading. When I finished, there was a long moment where neither of us spoke. Then Ruby made a sound that was not quite a word, something low and broken at the back of her throat, and I heard her press her hand over her mouth. Ruby. My own voice cracked on her name, just slightly, just enough. Honey, talk to me. I knew. The 2 words came out rough and unsteady, scraped raw from somewhere deep. Dad, I knew something was wrong. I have known for months, and I couldn't. Her voice broke apart completely on the last word, and I heard her pull in a sharp breath, fighting to get herself back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have pushed harder. I should have made you listen to me. My chest ached with a pain that had nothing to do with arsenic. Ruby, no, let me say it. She was crying now. I could hear it, that particular kind of crying she had always done, where she kept her voice as steady as she could, and the tears just fell without permission, the way they had the morning we buried her mother. Last time I was home, 3 months ago, I saw some papers on your desk when I went in to get the phone charger you keep in the drawer. They looked like legal documents, official ones, and there was a signature on them that didn't look right to me. It didn't look like your signature, Dad. The way you loop your Y's, it wasn't there. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Why didn't you say anything? Because every single time I said something about Colleen, you defended her. Her voice came back sharp, with a grief that had clearly been sitting in her for a long time waiting. Every time I told you I had a bad feeling, you told me I was projecting that. I wasn't giving her a fair chance, that I was still grieving Mom and looking for something to be angry at. And maybe part of me started to believe you. Maybe I started thinking I was the problem. A short, humorless sound that was almost a laugh. I took photos of those documents, Dad. I still have them on my phone. I just didn't know what to do with them. I closed my eyes. The mallards were still working their way along the pond bank outside my window, unhurried and oblivious. And the joggers were still circling the rose garden, and the world outside, my car was continuing exactly as it always had, completely indifferent to the fact that something between my daughter and me was breaking and mending at the same time. Ruby, I owe you an apology, I said. A real one. Not the kind a man gives when he's trying to close a conversation. The kind where I'm telling you that I was wrong and that I let you down, and that I am sorrier for that than I know how to say. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had steadied, though I could still hear the tears in it running just beneath the surface. You don't have to. I do, I said firmly. I do have to, because you were right and you were alone with it, and that should never have happened. That's on me. Another long pause, then quietly, okay. Just that, okay. The word my daughter had always used when she was accepting something she could not change and choosing to move forward anyway. It was the most Ruby thing she could have said, and it nearly undid me completely. I pressed the back of my wrist against my mouth for a moment, hard, until I was sure my voice would hold. Then I said, the FBI agent left a note. He said Colleen isn't working alone. There's more to this than just her. I heard Ruby pull in a slow breath. How much more? I don't know yet. He wants me to meet him, but first he said to call you. I watched a jogger pass my window without looking up. He said I needed to call you first. Ruby was quiet for just a second. Then something shifted in her voice. The grief was still there, but something else was moving through it now, something focused and resolute. I recognized it. She had gotten it from her mother. I'm booking a flight, she said. Right now while we're talking. Ruby, you don't have to, Dad. Her voice was steady and final. I'm booking a flight. Where do I stay so she doesn't see me? I thought for a moment. Spencer Reed, next door. He has the room, and he's been a friend for 20 years. He won't ask questions until we're ready to answer them. Okay? Keys clicking in the background, she was already on her laptop. I can get into Sacramento by 9 tonight if I leave in the next 2 hours. I'm going to text you the flight number. Ruby, Dad, stop. Her voice softened just slightly, just enough to let me hear what was underneath the efficiency. I love you. I'm coming. We'll figure this out together. Okay? That's what we do. My throat closed entirely. I managed just barely. That's what we do. Now, go meet the detective. A pause. And Dad, don't drink the tea. Despite everything, despite the terror sitting in my chest like a stone, despite the fury I was holding at bay with both hands, despite the grief that kept finding new corners to fill, I felt something loosen slightly in my ribs. Not relief, not quite, but the specific comfort of knowing you are no longer carrying something alone. I haven't, I said. Not since this morning. Good. Another pause. Then very quietly, so quietly I almost missed it. Those papers I photographed, I think they're a will, Dad, but I don't think you ever signed it. The comfort evaporated. The stone in my chest grew 3 sizes in an instant. Send me the photos, I said. Right now. Already sending, Ruby said, and I heard underneath the steadiness of her voice the thing she was not saying, that she had been sitting on this for 3 months, carrying it alone, waiting for the moment I would finally be ready to hear it. I had made my daughter wait 3 months. I pulled the phone from my ear as the photos came through 3 images on my screen, and I looked at the signature at the bottom of the first page, the looping even signature that bore my name, but not my hand, and felt the fury that I had been carefully containing since 7 o'clock that morning finally find its shape. It was not hot the way I had always imagined fury to be. It was cold, precise, and absolutely certain of what it intended to do next. I did not sleep that Monday night. I lay in the dark beside Colleen and listened to her breathe slow, even completely undisturbed, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about arsenic, about how it moves through the body, about how it accumulates in the soft tissues in the nervous system, in the hair and the nails, building up so gradually that by the time the damage becomes visible, it has already been happening for months. I had looked it up on my phone in the bathroom at 11 o'clock, door lock tap, running to cover the light. I read until my eyes burned and my hands had gone cold against the screen. By the time the sky outside began to lighten, I had made a decision. I told Colleen over breakfast that I had a routine checkup scheduled for that morning, one I had booked months ago that had slipped my mind until I checked my calendar the night before. She looked up from her toast with that warm, attentive expression and said she was glad I was keeping up with my appointments, that she had been meaning to remind me about it herself. She offered to drive me. I told her I preferred to go alone, that I might run a few errands afterward and did not want her to have to wait around. She smiled and said, "Of course. Drive careful, honey." I drove to Sutter Medical Center on L Street and sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes before going inside, just long enough to make sure my hands had stopped trembling. Then I walked through the main entrance, found the registration desk, and asked to see someone in internal medicine. When the intake coordinator asked the reason for my visit, I said I wanted a complete blood panel and that I specifically wanted a heavy metal screen included. She looked up from her keyboard. "Do you have a particular concern? Mr. Callahan, heavy metal panels aren't part of a standard workup. We usually order them when there's a specific exposure history or a presenting set of symptoms that—" "I understand," I said. I kept my voice level and my eyes on hers. "I have reason to believe I may have had prolonged exposure to arsenic. I would like it confirmed or ruled out today." A beat. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded and began typing. They took me to a lab room and drew 4 vials of blood. The technician, a young man with careful hands and a Sacramento Kings lanyard around his neck, made small talk about the weather while he worked. I answered in monosyllables and watched the dark red fill each tube with the detached focus of a man who has run out of room for ordinary sensation. Then I sat in a waiting room chair with a paper cup of water and waited. The waiting room at Sutter Medical on a Tuesday morning had the particular quality of a place where time moves differently than it does everywhere else. People sat in rows of chairs, the color of old mustard, flipping through magazines they were not reading, watching the door to the back hallway with the specific alertness of people who have been told their name will be called and have been waiting long enough to start doubting it. I sat among them and thought about Ruby, who was somewhere over Nevada by now, on her way back to Sacramento. I thought about Spencer Reed's kitchen, where I had eaten more Sunday dinners than I could count, and where I had never once imagined I would be asking to hide. I thought about my wife at home right now, probably watering the plants on the back porch the way she did every Tuesday morning. An hour and 40 minutes after they drew my blood, a woman in a white coat pushed through the hallway door and said my name. Dr. Patricia Norris was perhaps 50 with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the measured expression of someone who has delivered difficult information many times and has learned to do it without either softening it into meaninglessness or delivering it with unnecessary weight. She shook my hand and led me into a small consultation room and closed the door. She set a printed lab report on the table between us and folded her hands on top of it. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "your results came back with some findings I want to go through with you carefully." She slid the report across to me. "Your blood arsenic level is 0.18 milligrams per liter. To give you context, the threshold that the World Health Organization considers safe for chronic exposure is 0.01 milligrams per liter. You are testing at nearly 18 times that threshold." The number sat in the air between us, like something with physical weight. "The pattern of your results," she continued, her voice steady and precise, "is consistent with prolonged low-level exposure over an extended period, not a single large ingestion event. We are looking at what the toxicology literature calls chronic microdosing, small amounts introduced regularly over time, likely 12 to 14 months, based on the tissue saturation levels we are seeing." I looked down at the lab report. The numbers on the page blurred slightly at the edges, then sharpened again. "And the symptoms I have been having," I said, "the fatigue, the memory issues, the numbness in my hands some mornings, all consistent," she said. "Chronic arsenic exposure affects the peripheral nervous system, the cardiovascular system, and cognitive function in ways that can be easily mistaken for normal aging, particularly in a patient over 60. She paused. "I have to ask, how was this not caught in previous blood work?" "I had a standard panel done 8 months ago," I said. "My regular physician ordered the usual screening." Dr. Norris nodded slowly. "A standard comprehensive metabolic panel and CBC will not flag heavy metals. We do not include heavy metal screening in routine annual workups because the exposure risk for most patients is statistically low. Without a specific clinical reason to order it, an occupational history, a known environmental exposure, there is nothing in a standard physical that would catch this." She looked at me carefully. "Someone would have to know that in order to exploit it." The sentence landed like a key turning in a lock. "What happens if the exposure continues?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer and was bracing for it the way you brace for a wave you can see coming. Dr. Norris did not look away from me. "At your current saturation level, continued exposure over the next 60 to 90 days would likely cause peripheral neuropathy that may not be fully reversible, meaning damage to the nerve pathways in your extremities that treatment can manage but may not be able to entirely correct." A brief pause. "It needs to stop, now, and you will need to begin a chelation protocol to help your body clear what has already accumulated." I sat with that for a moment. Outside the consultation room, I could hear the muffled sounds of the hospital corridor, a cart rolling past, a phone ringing at a nursing station, someone laughing at something far down the hall, all the ordinary sounds of a building full of people going about the work of keeping other people alive. "Dr. Norris," I said, "I need to ask you to document everything from today's visit with the highest level of specificity your record system allows. Every number, every clinical notation, every time stamp." She studied me for a moment over her reading glasses. "Mr. Callahan, is there something I should know about the circumstances here?" "There may be," I said. "I can't tell you more than that right now, but the documentation may be needed for legal purposes." She held my gaze for another second, then nodded once crisply the way professionals nod when they have decided to trust someone without needing the full explanation. "I'll make sure the record is thorough," she said, "and I'm going to refer you to our toxicology department for follow-up. I'd like to see you back within the week." I thanked her, shook her hand again, and walked back out through the waiting room with its mustard-colored chairs and its paper cups and its people staring at the door. Outside, the Sacramento morning had warmed slightly. The fog burned off the sky, gone pale blue above the parking garage. I sat in my car and called Webb. He picked up on the first ring. "Callahan, It's confirmed, I said. 0.18, 14 months of exposure. The doctor says 60 to 90 more days, and there could be permanent nerve damage. A pause. Not long, but waited. I'm sorry, Webb said, and he meant it in the way that people who do not say unnecessary things mean it when they say it. Are you all right? I'm functioning, I said. What do I need to know about Julian Drake? Another pause. When Webb spoke again, his voice had shifted back into the register of a man delivering information he has been holding carefully for a long time. Julian Drake did not find Colleen by accident, Mr. Callahan. Voss recruited him specifically because of his history. With your firm, we have wire communications going back 14 months, showing Drake feeding Colleen real-time updates on your account activity, your login patterns, and your estate documents. He had remote access to your company's internal server that he never fully relinquished when you let him go. A beat. He left a back door. We found it 3 weeks ago. The cold fury I had felt in the parking lot at McKinley Park yesterday morning tightened another degree in my chest. Tell me everything, I said. Spencer Reed's house smelled like old books and coffee, the particular combination that I had always associated with Sunday afternoons, and good conversation, and the specific comfort of being somewhere that had not changed in 20 years. Spencer himself opened the door before I had finished climbing the porch steps, which meant Ruby had texted him. I was coming, which meant the two of them had already been talking, which meant I was probably the last person in this particular circle to arrive at a conclusion everyone else had been moving toward without me. That thought should have stung more than it did. Mostly I just felt tired and grateful. Now Wayne, Spencer gripped my hand and held it for a moment, the way men of his generation do when a handshake is not just a greeting, but a declaration of something. He was 68 years old, broad-shouldered and white-haired, with the kind of face that had started out handsome and aged into something more useful. The face of a man who had spent 30 years in a courtroom and learned that the most important thing it could do was be readable by juries. Come inside. Ruby's in the study. How is she? I asked, stepping into the hallway. She's your daughter, Spencer said, closing the door behind me. She spent 20 minutes last night telling me everything she knew, and then she spent another hour going through your company's public filing records on her laptop at my kitchen table, and then she made a list. He glanced at me sidelong. She made a list, Wayne. She's fine. I felt something loosen in my chest despite everything. She gets that from her mother? She gets a lot of things from her mother. Spencer led me down the hallway toward the study. She also gets some things from you, the part that doesn't fall apart when it probably should. Ruby was standing at Spencer's desk when I walked in, her laptop, open in front of her, a legal pad covered in neat columns of numbers beside it. She looked up when I came through the door, and for just a moment her composure cracked, her eyes filled. Her chin went tight, and then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me and pressed her face against my shoulder, the way she had when she was 7 years old, and the neighbor's dog had frightened her. I held her there with both arms and said nothing for a count of 5. Then she pulled back, dragged her wrist across her eyes, and said with the brisk efficiency of someone refusing to let themselves come apart when there is work to be done, "Sit down. I need to show you something." I sat. Spencer settled into the leather chair behind his desk and folded his hands. Ruby turned her laptop toward me. "Okay," she said, pulling a breath in through her nose. "I've been in your company's financial system since 6 this morning. Dad, you gave me your administrator credentials 2 years ago when you were having that server issue and needed someone to troubleshoot remotely. You never changed the password." "I know," I said. I kept meaning to. She gave me a look that I recognized her mother's look, the one that said, "We will discuss your habits later, but right now there are more important things. It's a good thing you didn't, because what I found in there is—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "It's bad, Dad. It's really bad, and I need you to hear all of it before you react." "Tell me," I said. She turned the laptop back toward herself and began walking me through it with the focused precision of someone who had spent the last several hours organizing chaos into something she could control. Over the past 8 months, 23 separate outgoing transfers had left the company's primary operating and investment accounts. Each one was categorized in the internal ledger as either a consulting fee or a vendor service payment. Each one was between $7,000 and $9,000 amounts, carefully kept under the $10,000 threshold that would automatically trigger a federal currency transaction report. Structuring. Spencer said quietly from behind his desk. Breaking payments into amounts that stay below federal reporting requirements. It's a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act. Never once crossing $9,999. Ruby said, her voice tightening with the specific anger of someone who has found something that was designed to be hidden and is furious that it was hidden so well. It's not an accident. Someone did this deliberately, and they knew exactly where the line was. She pulled up a second window. 3 company names appeared on the screen: Meridian Capital Advisors LLC, registered in Delaware; Pacific Bridge Consulting LLC, registered in Wyoming; Crestwood Financial Group LLC, also registered in Delaware. I ran searches on all 3, Ruby said. No physical addresses, no employees on record, no business activity of any kind outside of receiving these transfers. They were each incorporated within 2 weeks of the first payment going out. She looked at me. They're shell companies, Dad. They don't exist except on paper. And the registered agent for all 3, I said slowly already, feeling the weight of where this was going, is Julian Drake. The name landed in the room the way names do when they belong to someone who has made themselves a ghost in your life. Ruby looked at me sharply. You know him? Spencer asked. I leaned back in my chair and pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum, where a dull, pressurized ache had been sitting since the morning. Julian Drake worked with my firm for about 2 years, I said. 5 years ago, maybe a little more. He was brought in as an outside investment manager to help restructure one of our mid-size portfolios. Good instincts fast with numbers easy to work with. I paused. And then it came out that he had been misrepresenting his credentials. His CFA designation, that is the Chartered Financial Analyst certification. The main professional credential in investment management had been suspended by the CFA Institute for Ethics Violations. Unauthorized trading misuse of a client funds. I let him go immediately. Spencer's expression had gone very still. And you haven't had contact with him since? None. I looked at Ruby. Until apparently he started routing my company's money through 3 companies that don't exist. Ruby's jaw was set hard the way it got when she was holding something in that she wanted very much to say. She clicked to a 3rd window. There's more, she said. The 3 LLCs don't stand on their own. I traced the registered agent structure up 1 level, and all 3 of them are controlled through a parent entity. She turned the laptop toward me again. On the screen was a business registration page for a company called Voss & Associates Legal Services LLC, registered in New York with a Manhattan address that, when I had looked it up on my drive over, turned out to be a mail forwarding service. Voss, I said. The name meant nothing to me, but something happened to Spencer when I said it out loud. Something I had never seen happen to the most composed man I knew. His hands, which had been resting quietly on the desk in front of him, went very still. Not the stillness of someone listening. The stillness of someone who has just heard a sound they recognized from a long time ago and did not expect to hear again. Spencer. I leaned forward slightly. Do you know that name? He did not answer immediately. He picked up the ceramic mug on his desk, found it empty, set it back down. Looked at the business registration on Ruby's screen for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and I saw something moving behind his eyes that I had not seen there before in 20 years of friendship. It was not quite fear. It was the expression of a man recalibrating something he had believed to be safely in the past. Richard Voss, Spencer said. His voice had dropped to something low and careful. I know that name, Wayne. He paused. I sat across from that man at a legal conference in San Francisco in 2017, and what I know about Richard Voss is going to change everything you think you understand about what is happening to you. Ruby looked from Spencer to me. Her hand had gone to the edge of the desk, gripping it. Who is he? She asked. Spencer set both palms flat on the desk in front of him and looked at us both. He is not a lawyer anymore, Spencer said. He stopped being a lawyer in 2019 when the New York State Bar Association took his license away. But what Richard Voss became after that, he paused, and the pause had the weight of something that had been sitting in a locked room for a long time. That is a great deal more dangerous than anything he was before. Spencer did not make us wait long. He pushed back from his desk, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of the study, and returned with a manila folder that he set on the desk between us with the deliberate care of a man who has learned to treat paper like evidence. Ruby sent me the photographs last night, he said. I printed them and ran some checks this morning before you arrived. He opened the folder. What I found is worse than I expected. The document inside was 11 pages. A last will and testament bearing the name Wayne Arthur Callahan, dated the 15th of March, 2024. I recognized the formatting the same legal template I had used when I drafted my actual will years ago, with a different attorney in a different city. Whoever had created this had done their homework. The distribution clause, Spencer said, pointing to page 3 without touching it. Everything, the full investment portfolio, the Sacramento properties, the business accounts, all of it transfers to Colleen Marsh Callahan upon your death or upon a court determination of legal incapacity. He looked at me steadily. Ruby is not named anywhere in this document. My hands curled against my knees beneath the table. Ruby sitting beside me made a sound low in her throat, not quite a word, just something that came out before she could stop it, and pressed her knuckles against her lips. "The signature," I said. My voice came out flat. "Show me the signature." Spencer turned to the final page. My name was there in clean, even strokes. 2 even. I had signed my name approximately 10,000 times in 65 years, and I knew with the certainty of a man who knows his own body that the signature on that page had not come from my hand. The loops were uniform. The pressure was identical across every stroke. My actual signature breathed it, varied it had weight and habit, and the slight leftward pull I had developed in my 50s. This one was a copy of a copy, perfect in the way that only a machine can be perfect. "Digital forgery," Spencer said. "Someone captured a high-resolution scan of your genuine signature from an existing document and reproduced it here. It's a felony under California Penal Code Section 470. He moved his finger to the notarization block at the bottom of the page. "Now, look at this." The notary stamp read, "Diana M. Cole, Notary, Public State of California. License number CA 2019-4471. I ran that license number through the California Secretary of State's notary database this morning," Spencer said. His voice had gone quiet in the way it went quiet when he was certain of something and did not enjoy being certain of it. "There is no active or inactive notary license in California bearing that number. Diana Cole does not exist in the system." He closed the folder. "Practicing as a notary without a valid commission is a criminal offense under California Government Code, Section 8214, but that is secondary. The primary issue is that this will also lack valid witnesses." Ruby looked up. "What do you mean? Under California probate law, a valid will requires 2 adult witnesses to sign in the presence of the testator, the person making the will, and in the presence of each other." Spencer tapped the folder. "This document has 2 witness signatures. I ran both names through public records this morning. Neither individual exists at the addresses listed. Both signatures are fabricated." The room went very still. Not the peaceful kind of still. The kind that fills up right before something breaks. "So we have a forged signature," I said, slowly working through it. "A notary who doesn't exist. 2 witnesses who don't exist. And a document that would transfer everything I own to Colleen the moment I die or lose legal capacity." "That is correct," Spencer said. Ruby's voice, when it came, was tight and controlled, and barely covering something that was shaking underneath. "Spencer, if Dad had signed anything, in the weeks before he got sick enough that a court could question his capacity, could this document have stood up?" Spencer looked at her for a moment. "With the right attorney arguing it in probate court and without anyone examining the signatures closely, possibly, long enough to tie up the estate in litigation for years." He paused. "Long enough to cause serious damage before it was overturned." I stood up. "Not because I had somewhere to go, because I needed to be standing." "Wayne," Spencer said carefully, "there's one more thing. The entity controlling Julian Drake's shell companies, Voss and Associates." He opened the folder again to a page I had not seen a printout of a New York State Bar disciplinary record. Richard Voss was disbarred in 2019 for misappropriating $4.2 million from client trust funds. He was one of the most sophisticated real estate attorneys in New York before that. He set the page down. "The structure of this, will the LLC chain the timing? This is not something Julian Drake designed. This has Voss's architecture all over it." I looked at the disbarment record. At the photograph attached to it, a man in his late 50s, silver-haired with a kind of face that inspired confidence in people who did not know better. He built the trap, I said. He built the trap, Spencer confirmed. And you are not the first person he has built one for. I called Webb from Spencer's desk phone, put him on speaker, and set the phone in the center of the table so all three of us could hear. He picked up on the first ring. I've been waiting for this call, he said. Spencer Reed is with you? He is, I said, along with my daughter. Good. A pause, brief and purposeful. Then I'll tell you everything. Webb had been investigating Richard Voss for 3 years. Not Colleen, not Julian Drake, Voss. The other two were components, important ones, but components nonetheless. Pieces of a machine that Voss had designed, tested and refined over nearly a decade since losing his law license. The operation worked like this. Voss identified targets from New York using publicly available information, estate filings, business license, renewals, obituaries of spouses, probate records, men in their 60s and 70s with documented assets, adult children living at a distance, and a recent bereavement that statistical modeling suggested would make them more likely to form rapid emotional attachments. He had, Webb said, essentially built a predator's algorithm out of public data. Colleen was deployed once a target was selected. She had been working with Voss for 6 years. Her role was contact relationship building marriage. Julian Drake handled the financial architecture, the shell companies, the transfers, the fraudulent instruments from a distance using his knowledge of my firm's structure from the years he had worked with me. Diana Cole provided the legal paper trail, fabricating notarizations and witness signatures on demand. Voss took 40% of every successful acquisition. The remaining 60% was split between Colleen and Drake. How many victims? Ruby asked. Her voice was very controlled. 14 confirmed, Webb said. Across 6 states, total losses exceeding $18 million. Several of the earlier victims suffered lasting health effects that prevented them from participating in the investigation. A beat. We came close to moving on Voss twice. Both times he had structured his involvement so remotely that our evidence chain broke before it reached him. He never communicated directly with targets, never signed anything. Never appeared anywhere near the operation while it was active. Spencer leaned forward. Then how did you get to Colleen? She made a mistake in Nevada, Webb said. Used a notary license number that had been canceled rather than one she had fabricated entirely. A sharp-eyed probate clerk flagged it. By the time we traced it back to her, she had already relocated to California. Another pause. We had been watching her for 18 months before I knocked on your door, Mr. Callahan. Building the case from the outside in. I pressed my hand flat against the desk. And you didn't warn me, I said. Not an accusation. A statement of fact that I needed to say out loud. No, Webb said. And I understand what that cost you. But I have to be honest with you about the reason. If we had approached you earlier, Colleen would have known within 48 hours. No, Webb said. And I understand what that cost you. But I have to be honest with you about the reason. If we had approached you earlier, Colleen would have known within 48 hours. She has a system she monitors behavioral changes in her targets the way a clinician monitors vitals. Any shift in your routine, any sign that you had been warned, and she would have been gone. We also did not know about the arsenic until your medical records came through this morning. The exposure protocol was not in any of our prior case files. Voss refined it between Nevada and California. The moment we confirmed it, I was on your porch. Ruby made a sound beside me, a short, hard exhale that was not quite a word. I reached over and covered her hand with mine without looking away from the phone. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Webb said, we need your cooperation, and we need you to go home, Mr. Callahan, back to that house, back to that routine, because the only way this ends with all 4 of them in federal custody is if they believe you are still exactly where they left you. Spencer looked at me across the desk. Ruby looked at me. I looked at the phone in the center of the table. Tell me what you need, I said. Before I tell you what I decided to do next, and trust me, most people in my position would have run. I need to know if you are still with me. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just that. It tells me you are here, and honestly, knowing you are listening is what makes telling this story worth it. A note before we continue. Parts of this story have been shaped for narrative purposes and may not reflect every detail exactly as it occurred. If that is not the kind of story you are looking for, this is a perfectly good place to stop. No hard feelings at all. Webb arrived at Spencer's house 40 minutes later. He came alone in a plain gray sedan, and he brought a leather folio thick with printed documents that he spread across Spencer's dining table without preamble. Ruby moved her laptop to make room. Spencer brought a fresh pot of coffee that nobody touched. The four of us stood around the table and looked at what Webb had laid out: surveillance photographs, financial flowcharts, a timeline that stretched back nearly 4 years. And the weight of it filled the room the way weather fills a room before a storm breaks. "Two options," Webb said, standing at the head of the table with his hands flat on the surface. "Option 1, Mr. Callahan and Ruby leave Sacramento tonight. We place you both in protective custody, and we continue building the case from the outside." He paused. "The problem with option 1 is that Colleen will notice within 24 hours. She monitors his patterns. When he disappears, she disappears. Voss disappears. And every piece of evidence we have collected becomes insufficient to prosecute anyone above the level of Julian Drake." "Option 2, I said. Webb looked at me. "Option 2 is that you go home this afternoon. You continue the routine. You let her believe the plan is proceeding exactly as she intended." He pulled a single sheet from the folio and slid it toward me. "We wire the house. Every room, everything she says, everything Drake says, everything any of them say. Inside that building gets recorded on a federal server in real time. When they move, and they will move, because we have frozen the accounts and they are running out of time, they will do it inside a net they cannot see." Ruby's hands were pressed flat on the table. Her knuckles had gone white at the edges. "And my father," she said. "What happens to my father while he is sitting inside that net?" "He will not be alone," Webb said. "We will have eyes on the property around the clock. He will have a secure line to me directly, and we will have a response team within 3 minutes of any escalation." He looked at Ruby steadily. "I will not pretend there is no risk. There is. But the alternative is that 4 people who have destroyed 14 lives walk away from this with enough warning to start over somewhere else." The room went taut. Ruby turned to look at me, and I saw in her face everything she was not saying: the fear, the fury, the desperate wish that this was a problem she could solve by making a better list. "Ruby," I said quietly, "let me talk." She pressed her lips together and gave me a single tight nod. I looked at Webb, then at Spencer, who had not said anything since Webb arrived and whose expression told me he was doing the same arithmetic I was. Then I looked down at the timeline on the table, 4 years of other people's losses laid out in black ink on white paper. And I thought about the 14 names Webb had mentioned, men who had sat at their own breakfast tables in their own houses and never had the chance to know what was coming. I had the chance. "I'll go home," I said. Ruby made a sound beside me, sharp and involuntary, like something had pressed against a bruise. I reached over and put my hand on her arm. "I'm not doing this because I'm not afraid," I told her. "I'm doing this because I am. And because being afraid of the right things at the right time is the only way any of this ends the way it should." I looked at her until she met my eyes. 14 people, Ruby. 14. Her jaw worked. Her eyes filled, and she blinked hard twice, and they cleared. "You come home after," she said. Her voice was fierce and low, and left no room for argument. "Whatever happens in that house, you come home after." "That's the plan," I said. Webb began walking us through the specifics: the surveillance equipment, the emergency protocol, the trigger conditions under which his team would move. Spencer asked 3 precise legal questions and received 3 precise answers. Ruby took notes on her legal pad with the focused intensity of someone who needed her hands to be doing something, or she would not hold together. I listened to all of it, and somewhere underneath the fear and the fury and the grief that had been accumulating in my chest since Monday morning, I felt something else settle into place. Something I had not felt in 14 months. The particular quiet steadiness of a man who has stopped waiting for something to happen to him and decided to make something happen instead. When Webb finally gathered his documents and stood to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at me. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "when this is over, I want you to know something. The reason we came to you, the reason you specifically, is not just because you were the current case. It's because in 25 years of this work, I have learned to recognize the people who will hold when it counts. A beat. I'm counting on you to hold." I held his gaze. "I'll hold," I said. He reached into the outer pocket of the folio and produced a second device, smaller than the secure phone he had already given me, flat and matte black, no larger than a key fob. He set it on the table between us. "The microphones we install tonight stream live audio to our federal server," he said. "This device can pull that feed and push it to any Bluetooth-paired speaker system within range of the house." He looked at me steadily. "Including the outdoor speakers along your roofline. If you ever reach a point where you need the room to hear itself, you will know when that moment is. Press and hold the left side for 3 seconds. It will play back the last 30 minutes of captured audio at full volume." I picked it up, turned it over once in my hand. It was warm from his pocket and weighed almost nothing, which seemed wrong for something that carried that much consequence. "Does she know about the outdoor speakers?" Ruby asked from across the table. "She commented on them once," I said. 4th of July, 2 summers ago. Said I had them turned up too loud." I set the device down and looked at Webb. "She won't expect them." "No," Webb said. "She won't." I slid the key fob into the inside pocket of my jacket next to the secure phone. 2 small objects. Between them, the weight of everything that was going to happen next. Webb nodded once and left. The 3 of us stood in Spencer's hallway after the door closed and said nothing for a moment. Outside, his sedan started pulled away from the curb and was gone. The street went quiet again. The afternoon light through the front window was the flat pale gold of a Sacramento November that had given up trying to be warm. Spencer put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Ruby looked at me across the hallway with her jaw set and her eyes clear, and everything she was not saying written plainly across her face anyway. I picked up my jacket from the coat hook by the door. "I'll hold," I said again, to both of them, to myself. Then I walked out to my car and drove home. The hardest performance of my life began the moment I turned onto our street. I had driven this road 10,000 times, past the Henderson's oak tree that dropped acorns on my car every October, past the Murphy's flagpole that had been slightly crooked since the windstorm 3 years ago, past the familiar rhythm of mailboxes and driveways, and the particular quality of late afternoon light in a Sacramento November that turned everything a flat pale gold. Everything looked exactly the same. Nothing was. I pulled into the driveway, sat for 30 seconds with both hands on the wheel, and made myself breathe. Then I got out of the car, walked up the front path, and opened the door. Colleen was in the kitchen. The smell of something cooking drifted through the house, roasted chicken rosemary, the particular warmth of a home where someone has been busy all afternoon. She appeared in the kitchen doorway when she heard me come in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and her face opened into a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "There you are," she said warmly. "I was starting to worry. You were gone so long." "Client ran over," I said. I hung my coat on the hook. My hands were steady. I had decided somewhere on the drive home that the only way through this was to stop acting and start being, to find the version of myself that existed before Monday morning and put him back on like a coat that still fit. "Something smells good." "Roast chicken." She crossed the room and kissed me on the cheek, and I let her, and I did not flinch, and that required more of me than anything I had done that entire day. "You look tired, sweetheart. Come sit down." I sat, I ate, I asked about her afternoon. I listened to her talk about a phone call with her sister, a new book she had started, the neighbor's dog, who had gotten into the recycling bins again. I laughed in the right places. I refilled my own water glass twice. I did everything a man does when he is comfortable in his home and trusts the person sitting across from him. And the entire time beneath the performance, something in my chest was counting minutes. At 9:30, I told Colleen I was exhausted and was going to bed early. She touched my face with her palm and said she hoped I was not coming down with something. I told her I was fine, just tired, and went upstairs. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and watched the ceiling and waited. At 11:40, my phone, the secondary one, Webb had given me a plain black device that I kept in the inside pocket of my jacket, vibrated once. A single word from Ruby Reddy. I got up, moved quietly to the bedroom door, and listened. Colleen's breathing from her side of the bed was slow and even. I stepped into the hallway, walked to the top of the stairs, and from the landing, I could see the faint beam of a small tactical flashlight moving through the front room below Ruby and a technician from Webb's team, already inside through the back door I had left unlocked. I descended the stairs and found them in the living room. The technician was a compact, methodical man who moved through the house the way surgeons move, no wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. He had already opened a black case on the coffee table and was laying out equipment with gloved hands. He held up a finger before either Ruby or I could speak. Then he produced a handheld device roughly the size of a television remote and began moving it slowly around the room, a radio frequency detector designed to locate active transmitting devices. The device chirped softly near the bookshelf clock, then again near the electrical outlet by the door to Wayne's study. The technician looked at Ruby. Ruby looked at me. The three of us stood very still while the implications settled. Colleen had placed 2 surveillance devices inside my home. A micro camera concealed inside the decorative clock on the living room bookshelf, and a second unit disguised as a standard electrical outlet cover in the study. Positioned, I realized, with a cold drop in my stomach, directly facing my desk. She had been watching me. For how long, I did not know, but she had been watching. The technician photographed both devices without touching them. Then, with the careful precision of someone who understood that the next step had to be invisible, he connected a small override module to each camera's transmitter frequency and replaced the live feed with a looped recording, 30 minutes of footage showing an empty room cycling continuously. From Colleen's monitoring device, wherever it was, the house would appear undisturbed. Ruby pressed her hand briefly against my arm. Her fingers were trembling slightly and she gripped me once hard before letting go. Then the technician began installing Webb's equipment. High-definition cameras no larger than a coat button fitted into the smoke detector housings. The bookshelf ornaments the hall light fixture. Directional microphones in the ceiling, molding calibrated to capture conversation at normal speaking volume from anywhere in the room. Every device encrypted and streaming, live to a federal server that Webb could access from a vehicle parked 2 blocks away. It took 90 minutes. When it was done, the house looked exactly as it had before. The technician packed his case and slipped out the back without a word. Ruby stood in the hallway and looked at me, and her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was holding something too large to say. "Go," I told her softly. "Get some sleep at Spencer's. I'll be fine." She stepped forward and pressed her forehead briefly against my shoulder, just for a second, just long enough. Then she pulled back, straightened her jacket, and walked out the back door into the dark. I stood alone in my living room. Around me, in the walls, in the ceiling, in the ordinary objects of an ordinary house, dozens of lenses and microphones waited in the dark alongside me. I walked upstairs, got back into bed, and lay beside my wife. Above our bed, inside the smoke detector, I had installed myself 4 years ago after the batteries died. On the old one, a small green light blinked once every 30 seconds. Colleen did not stir. Her breathing stayed slow and even. I stared at the ceiling and thought we are both watching each other now, and only one of us knows it. The alert came at 2:14 in the morning. I felt the secondary phone vibrate against my ribs. I had fallen into a shallow, restless sleep, with it tucked inside my undershirt against my skin, because I did not trust myself to hear it from the nightstand. I was awake before the second pulse. I slid out of bed without making a sound, crossed the dark bedroom in my socks, and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind me. Ruby's message was 3 words. "Look at this." A screenshot followed. It was a fraud alert from the company's primary investment account, generated automatically by the banking system's security protocol at 2:13 a.m. Julian Drake had attempted to initiate a wire transfer of $1.2 million to a newly registered LLC account at a bank in the Cayman Islands. The transfer had been flagged and suspended automatically, not by Ruby, not by Webb, but by the bank's own fraud detection algorithm, which had identified the destination account as a high-risk offshore entity created less than 72 hours earlier. The system had stopped him. For now. I typed back, "How long before he tries again?" Ruby's response came in under a minute, already talking to Webb. "We're putting a federal freeze on all accounts this morning, every single one. He won't be able to move a single dollar without a federal court order reversing the freeze." I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom door and read that message twice. Behind the door, I could hear Colleen breathing slow, even completely undisturbed, the breathing of a woman who believed everything was still going according to plan. I thought about $1.2 million moving through a wire at 2 in the morning. I thought about the word offshore. I thought about Julian Drake sitting somewhere in Sacramento right now, staring at a failed transaction notice on his screen and reaching for his phone. I already knew who he was calling. Webb confirmed it 40 minutes later, when I had moved downstairs to the kitchen, the lights off, sitting at the table in the dark with both phones in front of me. A text from the secure line: Drake contacted Voss at 2:58 a.m. Encrypted call, 7 minutes. We captured the signal. Voss has ordered them to finish within 48 hours. No more waiting for natural progression. They're going to come for the signature directly. My stomach dropped the way it drops when an elevator starts moving before you expect it. 48 hours. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and sat with that number. 2 days. They had been patient for 14 months, and now, because a banking algorithm had blocked a wire transfer in the middle of the night, they had compressed their entire timeline into 48 hours. Voss was cutting the operation short, which meant Colleen would move fast, which meant the window we had been carefully constructing was about to either snap shut or become the only door that mattered. I heard movement upstairs, footsteps crossing the bedroom floor, then the bathroom door closing, water running. I put both phones in my robe pocket and stood up. When Colleen came downstairs 20 minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the newspaper exactly where she had seen me 100 mornings before. She was wearing a pale blue robe, her hair loose, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway with a look of gentle concern pulling at the corners of her eyes. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. I looked up from the paper and gave her the half smile I had given her 100 times. "Old man problems." She made a soft sound, warm, sympathetic, and moved to the counter to start the kettle. "I'll make you something. That new blend is wonderful for—" "Just coffee," I said. "Thank you, though." She paused for just a fraction of a second, so brief I might have missed it a week ago. Then she smiled and said, "Of course, honey," and reached for the coffee filters instead. I watched her move around my kitchen, opening the cabinet, measuring the grounds, filling the carafe, and I thought about 48 hours. I thought about the house full of cameras she could not see. I thought about the federal freeze that would hit every account she and Julian had access to when Ruby's paperwork cleared in a few hours. I thought about the net invisible and patient that had been drawing tighter since Monday morning. She set a fresh cup in front of me, squeezed my shoulder, and went to sit across the table. Outside the kitchen window, the Sacramento sky was beginning to lighten, just barely, the gray dissolving at the edges into something that was not yet dawn, but was trying to be. 48 hours. I took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, and turned a page of the newspaper I was not reading. "You know what I was thinking?" I said. Colleen looked up. "What's that?" "Maybe we should have the Hendersons over for dinner this week." I kept my voice easy, unhurried, the voice of a man with nothing on his mind. "We haven't seen them in a while." She smiled. "I think that's a lovely idea." I smiled back. And somewhere in the walls around us, everything was listening. The day passed the way days pass when you are waiting for something you cannot hurry. I went through the motions. I read in the living room while Colleen worked in the garden. I helped her carry in the last of the potted plants before the evening chill set in, holding doors open and making small talk about frost dates and whether the rosemary would survive another Sacramento winter. I ate the dinner she made. I watched an hour of television I could not have described 5 minutes after it ended. At 9 o'clock, I told her I was going to bed early. She said goodnight and kissed my cheek and told me to sleep well. I went upstairs and waited. At 11:15, when the rhythm of her breathing had settled into the deep, unhurried cadence of sleep. Beside me, I got up. I put on my robe, found my slippers in the dark, and walked down the hall to my study. I did not turn on the overhead light. I turned on the small desk lamp, the one with the green glass shade that Eleanor had given me for my 50th birthday 15 years ago now. And I sat down in my chair and let the quiet settle around me. The study looked the way it always looked. Books on 3 walls, the old leather desk blotter worn pale at the corners. A framed photograph on the shelf to my left. Eleanor and Ruby and me. Ruby, maybe 6 years old, all 3 of us squinting into the sun at a beach in Oregon. Ruby had been terrified of the waves that day. I had carried her on my back for most of the afternoon. I looked at Eleanor's face in that photograph for a long time. She had been gone for 5 years. Ovarian cancer 8 months from diagnosis to the end. She had handled it with the same quiet stubbornness with which she had handled everything, practically without self-pity, concerned above all else with making sure Ruby and I would be all right after. The last coherent conversation we had 3 days before the end, she had gripped my wrist with fingers that had gone thin and fragile and said, "Wayne, don't let her grow up thinking she has to be strong alone. She gets that from you, and it's going to hurt her." I had promised. And then I had let my daughter carry something alone for 3 months because I had not wanted to hear it. I pulled a sheet of paper from the desk drawer and uncapped the pen Eleanor had given me, the good one, the one I kept for things that mattered, and I began to write. I did not plan what I was going to say. I just wrote. I told Ruby that I was proud of her in ways I had not said out loud often enough. I told her that her mother would have been astonished by the woman she had become. Not surprised because Eleanor had always known exactly what Ruby was made of, but astonished the way you are, astonished when something you believed in completely turns out to be even more true than you thought. I told her that whatever happened in the next 48 hours, she should know that the best thing I ever did better than the company, better than the house, better than anything I had built or saved or protected, was being her father. I told her where the original will was, the real one filed with my attorney in Roseville, the one that left everything to her. Then I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope and wrote her name on the front in the careful, deliberate hand of a man who wants to be sure it will be found. I put it in the bottom drawer under the old tax files where Colleen had never looked. I sat for a while after that without writing anything. The house was completely quiet. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street, and its headlights swept briefly across the curtains and then were gone. I picked up the secondary phone and composed the message to Colleen that Webb and I had agreed on 2 days ago. I kept it simple. I told her I had not been sleeping well, that I had been thinking about some paperwork I wanted to get sorted, that it would give me peace of mind to have certain things in order before I felt any worse. I asked if she could come home tomorrow evening. I read it over once. Then I sent it. Her response came in 4 minutes. Even at that hour. She had left the house sometime after dinner. I had heard her car pull out around 10, a sound I had noted and said nothing about, and wherever she had gone, she was awake and waiting. Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything. I read those words, I'll take care of everything, and felt the particular nauseating irony of them move through me like cold water. Then I turned off the desk lamp, sat in the dark for a moment with Eleanor's photograph somewhere to my left. Invisible now, but present the way things are present when you have looked at them long enough that they exist in you, whether you can see them or not. I'm going to be okay, I said quietly, to Eleanor, to the dark, to myself. I got up, walked back down the hall, and got into bed. Outside the window, Sacramento was completely still. 48 hours had become 36. Before I reveal what happened, the night they came back to my house, the night everything either fell apart or came together, and I genuinely did not know which it would be. Leave the word justice in the comments if you think what I did was the right call. I want to see how many of you are still here with me. One more thing worth mentioning, some details in what follows have been constructed for storytelling and educational purposes. If you would rather not continue, you can step away right here and I will understand completely. Thursday moved through me like water through sand. I went through the day on autopilot coffee in the morning, a walk around the block that I did not feel lunch, I did not taste. Webb checked in at noon with a single text, "Team is in position. Everything is ready on our end." I texted back 2 words, "So am I." By 8 in the evening, I was in the living room, sitting in my armchair with the lamp turned low and the television on, at a volume I could not hear. I had arranged myself the way a tired old man arranges himself, shoulders slightly forward, head tipped back against the cushion, the remote control loose in my fingers. I was not asleep, but anyone looking through the front window would have believed I was. Webb's voice came through the small earpiece, barely louder than a whisper. "Vehicle turning onto your street. Dark SUV. 3 occupants." My breathing stayed even. My body stayed still. Headlights swept across the living room ceiling as the SUV pulled into the driveway. I heard the engine cut, doors opening, 1, 2, 3. Footsteps on the front path, deliberate and unhurried. The sound of a key entering the lock. The front door opened. Colleen came in first. Then Julian Drake, a man I had not seen in 5 years. Heavier, now his hair gone mostly gray at the temples, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who has done this before and intends to be finished quickly. Behind him, Diana Cole, small and precise, carrying a structured leather briefcase that she held slightly away from her body, the way people carry things they consider valuable. When Colleen's voice was soft, careful. She set her bag on the entryway table and crossed toward me. "Honey, we're here." I let my eyes open slowly the way a man wakes who has been deeply under. I blinked at her, then at Julian, then at the woman behind him I did not recognize. "Colleen." My voice came out rough with manufactured sleep. "I didn't hear you come in." She crouched in front of my chair and took both my hands in hers, and her eyes were full of that warm, devastating concern that she wore like a second skin. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? You look pale." "Tired," I said. Just tired. She squeezed my hands. That's okay. We're going to take care of everything tonight, and then you can rest as long as you need. She glanced back at Julian. You remember Julian, don't you? He's been helping me sort out some of the financial paperwork. I looked at Julian Drake with the blank, vaguely confused expression of a man whose memory is not what it was. Julian met my gaze with the practiced pleasantness of someone who has learned to look harmless. Good to see you, Wayne, he said. Sorry to come by so late. It's fine, I said. I wasn't sleeping well anyway. Diana Cole had moved to the dining room table without being invited. She set her briefcase on the surface and unzipped it with quiet, practiced efficiency. I could see from where I sat the edge of a document packet, a portable fingerprint scanner, and a compact notary seal press. They had come prepared to finish everything in one visit. Outside, I knew Webb's team was positioned at every exit. I knew Ruby was in the passenger seat of a dark sedan, 2 blocks north, watching the live feed on her laptop, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she had stopped tasting an hour ago. I knew the microphones in the ceiling were capturing every syllable, every footstep, every careful breath. None of that made the next part easier. Julian set his laptop on the side table near the bookshelf and began connecting to the home network. His fingers moved with the quick, practiced certainty of someone who has done this particular thing many times in many houses belonging to many men who did not know what was happening to them. Then, just before sitting down, Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, stepped toward the hallway, and took the call. His voice dropped to something low and clipped. I could not hear the words, but Webb could. The text came through my earpiece 40 seconds later. Webb's voice barely audible. It's Voss, telling Drake to finish before midnight. We've got it. Our perimeter microphones picked up Drake's end of the call clearly enough. Combined with the signal intercept we flagged from Tuesday night, that is the direct link we needed. Something shifted in my chest. Not relief, not yet. But the particular feeling of a door locking behind you, the sound of a thing becoming irreversible. Julian came back into the living room and nodded once at Colleen. She turned back to me with that luminous, practiced smile. Okay, sweetheart, she said gently, reaching for the document folder Diana had laid on the coffee table. Let's get you taken care of. I looked at the folder, at her hands, at the pen she was already holding out toward me. And then Julian's voice came from across the room, sharp and suddenly wrong. Colleen. She looked up. The accounts! His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone flat. All of them. I can't get in. They've been frozen, not just locked frozen. This is a federal hold. The warmth in Colleen's face did not disappear all at once. It drained slowly the way color drains from something left too long in the sun. She looked at Julian, then she looked at me. And for just a moment, the briefest fracture of a moment, the mask slipped entirely. That's all right, she said. Her voice had changed, still controlled, but the warmth was gone from it, now replaced by something colder and more functional. She set the pen down on the coffee table and looked at me with eyes that were doing arithmetic. We still have the documents. That's what matters tonight. She picked the pen back up and held it out again. Wayne, she said, I need you to sign. I looked at the pen in Colleen's outstretched hand. Then I looked up at her face, at the patience in it, the practiced tenderness, the slight tilt of her head that said, I am doing this for you. And I said in the slow, uncertain voice of a man who has misplaced his footing, I'm sorry. Could I get some water first? My throat is very dry. Something flickered behind her eyes, but she smiled. Of course, sweetheart. I pushed myself out of the armchair, with the careful effort of a man 20 years older than I, steadied myself on the armrest, and shuffled toward the kitchen. Julian watched me go without expression. Diana did not look up from her documents. In the kitchen, I stood at the sink and turned on the tap, let the water run, filled a glass. And through the earpiece barely audible beneath the sound of the water, I heard Webb's voice. They're moving to the dining room. Stay in the kitchen as long as you can. I drank the water slowly, set the glass down, picked it up again. Then Colleen's voice drifted from the dining room, no longer warm, no longer soft, stripped of every layer she wore for other people. He'll sign, she said. He's confused enough. When I tell him it's for his protection, he'll do whatever I say. He always has. My hand tightened around the glass. Julian's voice lower. The freeze on the accounts. That's a federal hold, Colleen. That's not Wayne doing it himself. I know what it is. Her voice did not waver. It doesn't change tonight. We get the signature, we file the will, and we petition for incapacity determination next week. By the time anyone untangles the accounts, the estate transfer will already be in motion. A pause. I've done this before, Julian. Twice. It works. Texas, Julian said, and Nevada. The word landed flat and certain. George Whitfield in Dallas never knew what was happening until his daughter found him in a hospital, and by then I was already gone. Same with the man in Reno. The beauty of it is that by the time the symptoms become undeniable, everyone around them has already been told for months that they're declining. No one questions it. Her voice carried the particular confidence of someone recounting a method they have refined to satisfaction. Wayne's been declining for 14 months. I have dinner party witnesses. I have a doctor's appointment where his own physician noted cognitive concerns. I have a paper trail that any probate attorney would find completely convincing. Diana's voice quiet and precise. And if he refuses to sign tonight, a beat. Then Colleen said with a calm that turned my stomach completely over, he won't refuse. But if he does, we adjust the timeline. Richard wants this closed before the end of the month. We'll find another way. Richard. The name hit the ceiling microphone with perfect clarity and traveled in real time through an encrypted channel to a federal server and to the recording device in Webb's vehicle 2 blocks away, and to the laptop where my daughter was sitting with her hands pressed flat against her thighs to keep them from shaking. Webb's voice in my ear, barely a breath. That's Voss. We have the direct connection. Wayne, 15 more seconds. I stood at the kitchen sink and counted. Colleen's voice again, almost conversational now. The arsenic protocol was Richard's design, not mine. Cleaner than anything I would have developed on my own. Slow enough to look like natural deterioration, fast enough to stay on schedule. Wayne's neurological panel in 6 weeks would have shown enough degradation to support the incapacity filing without any further intervention needed. She paused. He was close. He really was. 15 seconds. My jaw ached. I had not realized I was clenching it. I unclenched it, deliberately rolled my shoulders, and picked up the water glass. Webb's voice, we have everything. Move when you're ready. I set the glass in the sink. I turned off the tap, and I walked back out of the kitchen toward the dining room, and as I came through the doorway, I looked at Colleen across the table, and I stopped shuffling, and I stopped hunching, and I stood up straight for the first time in 3 days. And I looked at her the way a man looks when he no longer needs to pretend to be something he is not. Her face changed. Wayne, she started. I heard you, I said. Every word. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. Not because I was calm, my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth, but because I needed to count something to hold on to something numerical and certain, while the world inside my dining room rearranged itself around what I had just said. Colleen's face did something I had never seen it do in 2 years of marriage. It went completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a woman managing her reactions. The involuntary stillness of a person whose system has just received information it was not prepared to process. Then Julian moved. He shoved back from the table so fast his chair scraped a long, ugly note across the hardwood floor, and he crossed to his laptop in 3 strides and hammered at the keyboard with both hands, trying one last time to force his way through the federal freeze on my accounts. His jaw was set hard, his breathing audible. The screen flashed red, then red again. A lockout notification that no amount of typing was going to change. It's done, he said through his teeth. The whole system is locked out. This isn't a bank hold, this is... He stopped, looked at me. Something moved across his face that was not quite fear and not quite calculation, but somewhere between the two. How long have you known? Long enough, I said. Diana Cole had gone very still at the end of the table, her hands resting on her notary case, her eyes moving between me and Colleen, with the careful attention of someone reassessing an exit strategy. Colleen took 1 step toward me. Her voice, when it came, was lower than I had ever heard it, stripped of warmth, stripped of softness, stripped of every performance she had ever given in this house. What was left underneath was something I had only glimpsed once before in the fraction of a second when her mask slipped in the kitchen 20 minutes ago. Wayne, she said my name like it was a problem she was solving. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I said. So do you. Her eyes searched my face, and I watched her do what she had always done, assess, calculate, look for the angle. She took another step. Whatever you think you heard, whatever someone has told you, we can talk about this. Just the two of us. Her voice shifted, reaching for warmth that was no longer there to reach for. I love you. Everything I have done has been because I love you. Something tore loose in my chest when she said that. Not because I believed it, because I remembered a time when I had completely without question, and the distance between that man and the man standing in this dining room felt like the longest distance I had ever traveled. No, I said, you don't. I reached into the pocket of my robe and pressed the button. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the outdoor speaker system I had installed along the roofline 2 summers ago, the one Colleen had commented was too loud when I tested it for the 4th of July, came alive. And Colleen's own voice filled the Sacramento night. Clear, unhurried, utterly incriminating. The arsenic protocol was Richard's design, not mine. Cleaner than anything I would have developed on my own. Slow enough to look like natural deterioration, fast enough to stay on schedule. The words poured out across the quiet residential street, bouncing off the Henderson's oak tree, drifting past the Murphy's crooked flagpole, reaching the lit windows of houses where neighbors were watching television or washing dishes or putting children to bed, and were now all of them stopping to listen. Colleen's face collapsed. Not dramatically, not in the way of someone performing shock. In the way of a structure whose load-bearing wall has just given way, everything held together by tension, suddenly having nothing left to hold against. Her hand came up and pressed hard against her mouth, and she made a sound behind it that was not a word, not a cry, just the sound of something being unmade. Julian spun toward the window. Diana shoved her notary case off the table, reaching for her bag. And outside, as Colleen's recorded voice continued its calm, methodical confession to the neighborhood of Sacramento, the first siren began. Then another. Then the sweep of blue and red light across my living room curtains, painting the walls in the colors of everything I had been working toward since Monday morning. Webb's voice in my earpiece, steady and certain. "We're coming in, Mr. Callahan. Step back from the door." I stepped back, and I stood in the middle of my dining room, in the house I had owned for 22 years, surrounded by the furniture Eleanor had helped me choose, and the photographs Ruby had grown up looking at, and the walls that had heard every ordinary conversation of an ordinary life, and I felt my legs want to give. I did not let them. I pressed one hand flat against the dining room table, and I stood up straight, and I kept my feet under me because I had told Marcus Webb 4 days ago that I would hold, and a man who says he will hold has to mean it all the way to the end. The front door opened. Webb came through first badge, out 2 agents behind him. He looked at me across the room and gave me a single nod, small, precise, carrying everything that did not need to be said out loud. Then he turned to Colleen. "It's Colleen Marsh," he said. "You are under arrest." What happened next happened fast. 2 agents moved past Webb into the living room, and the third went straight for the back of the house. Julian Drake took 3 steps toward the patio door. The instinct of a man whose first response to danger is to calculate the nearest exit, and made it exactly as far as the door handle before the agent was there. One hand on Julian's shoulder, the other producing handcuffs with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this particular thing many times in many houses and feels nothing about it either way. Julian did not fight. His shoulders dropped. He let them take his wrists behind his back with the boneless resignation of a man who has run the numbers and knows they do not work in his favor anymore. Diana Cole tried a different approach. She had her bag over her shoulder and was moving toward the front door with the quick head-down urgency of someone who believes that if they do not make eye contact, they cannot be stopped. The agent at the front entrance put a hand up. She stopped. She set the bag down. She sat in the chair by the door when they told her to sit, and she pressed her hands flat on her thighs and stared at a point on the floor and did not say a word. Colleen did not try to run. She stood in the center of my dining room, while Webb read her rights the full Miranda warning, steady and unhurried, every word landing in the room like something permanent, and she listened with her arms crossed over her chest and her chin lifted and her eyes somewhere above and beyond Webb's left shoulder, as if she were in a different room entirely. As if none of this was quite real enough to require her full attention. When Webb finished, she looked at me. Not at Webb, not at the agents, at me. And for just a moment, behind everything she had ever shown me and everything I now knew she had never meant, I saw something I had not expected. Not remorse, not fear. something smaller and stranger than either a flicker of what might have been genuine surprise that it had ended this way. That I, of all the men she had sat across breakfast tables from, had been the one to hold. Then she looked away. Webb's phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He glanced at it, and I watched something shift in his expression. Not surprise, but the particular contained satisfaction of a man who has been waiting for a specific piece of information for a very long time, and has just received it. He looked at me. "New York Field Office," he said. "Richard Voss was taken into custody 11 minutes ago at his Manhattan office. His legal team was already present, which means he knew we were close. A beat. It also means he didn't know how close." The breath I took then was the first full breath I had taken since Monday morning. 3 years Webb had been building toward this. 14 victims across 6 states. And in the space of one Sacramento night, every piece of it had come together at the same time in the same net, without a single thread left loose. They led Colleen out through the front door first. She walked with her hands cuffed behind her, and her chin still lifted, and her eyes forward, and she did not look at me again as she crossed the threshold of the house she had spent 14 months treating as a means to an end. I watched her go from the center of the dining room and felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief, not yet. Something quieter, something that had no clean name. The particular exhausted gravity of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has only just been allowed to put it down. Julian came next, his laptop, and the forged documents already bagged as evidence. Diana after him, the notary case seized the portable fingerprint scanner, sealed in an evidence bag. I walked out onto the front porch. The street looked nothing like itself. 3 unmarked FBI vehicles, 2 Sacramento police units, a forensics van. Blue and red lights cycling across the faces of my neighbors who had come out in 1s and 2s and now stood in small clusters along the sidewalk in their robes and their jackets, watching with the stunned, particular attention of people who have heard something unbelievable confirmed. Colleen's recorded voice had gone silent when Webb's team came in, but it had been playing long enough. Webb came to stand beside me on the porch. 14 victims, he said quietly. Every one of them is going to hear about tonight. Good, I said. A car door opened at the far end of the block. Ruby came toward me, at something between a walk and a run, her laptop still in one hand, her jacket half on her hair, loose from whatever she had put it up in, and she crossed the pool of streetlight at the edge of my driveway and came up the porch steps, and wrapped both arms around me without slowing down, and I caught her and held on. She was shaking. Not with crying, though I could feel the effort it was costing her not to, but with the particular full-body tremor of someone who has been holding themselves together at maximum tension for 4 days straight and has only just received permission to stop. I held her and did not say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said that was not already being said by the fact of her there and me there, and both of us still standing. After a while, she pulled back and looked at my face, and her eyes were wet, but her jaw was steady. "You held," she said. "I held," I said. Above us, the Sacramento sky had gone fully dark, and the blue and red lights kept turning, and somewhere in the city, a freight train sounded its horn once long and low, the way it did every night, regardless of what was happening on any particular street in any particular life. Everything kept going, the way it does. The morning after was the quietest morning I had known in 14 months. I woke at 5:43 without an alarm, the way I had woken every morning of my adult life, and lay in the gray pre-dawn light of a bedroom that felt for the first time since Colleen had moved her things into it, entirely mine again. The other side of the bed was smooth and undisturbed. The house was still. No footsteps from downstairs, no smell of herbal tea threading through the door. Just quiet. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug and let myself do something I had not allowed myself to do since Monday morning. Nothing. For 20 minutes I sat and did nothing and thought nothing and let the house settle around me in the early light, like a place that had been holding its breath and had finally, after a very long time, been allowed to exhale. Then Webb knocked on the door. He came in, accepted the coffee I offered, and sat across from me at the kitchen table where Colleen had sat for 14 months. He looked tired in the particular way of a man who has not slept, but would not say so. Diana Cole retained counsel last night, within an hour of booking, he said. As of this morning, her attorney has been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office. She wants to talk. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Formal plea agreement will take 48 hours to structure, but based on what her attorney is signaling, she's prepared to provide complete documentation of the network's operations, every transaction, every fabricated instrument, every target going back 6 years. In exchange for what I asked: reduced sentence, cooperation credit, likely 12 years, possibly less with good behavior. He met my eyes. It's not nothing, Wayne. 14 families are going to get answers because of what she tells us. I thought about that. About 14 men who had sat at their own tables in their own kitchens and not known what was happening to them. About the ones Webb had mentioned whose health had not recovered. About the particular indignity of being deceived by someone who had studied you like a problem to be solved. What about Voss? I asked. Transported from New York last night under federal escort? Webb said not extradited. He was careful with the word because this was not a foreign country. This was a man being moved between jurisdictions within his own nation's legal system. He'll be arraigned in federal court here in Sacramento within 72 hours. His legal team is already arguing for bail. They won't get it. A pause. 3 years, Wayne. I have been building this case for 3 years. What happened in your house last night gave us everything we needed to close it. Ruby appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had slept at Spencer's and driven over at first light, and she looked the way people look after a crisis has ended, not rested exactly, but lighter, as if something that had been pressing on her from the inside had been removed. She poured herself a coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at Webb. The accounts, she said. What happens now? The federal freeze lifts within 30 days once the court issues the asset recovery order, Webb said. Every unauthorized transfer goes through forensic accounting. Anything that moved through Drake's shell companies gets traced and clawed back. Spencer Reed has already filed the petition to have the fraudulent will declared void under California probate code. He looked at me. Your estate is intact, Wayne. All of it. I nodded. The number $5 million, everything I had spent 40 years building, felt very abstract that morning. What felt real was the kitchen, the coffee. Ruby leaning against my counter with her hair still loose from sleep. Spencer arrived at 9 o'clock with a leather folder and a calm, methodical efficiency that I recognized as his way of caring for people, not with words, but with competence. He walked me through every document. The petition to void the fraudulent will. The motion to restore full administrative access to my business accounts. The formal request to Sutter Medical for complete copies of my toxicology records to be submitted as evidence. He explained each one before I signed it in the careful, unhurried way of a man who has spent 30 years making sure people understood what they were putting their name to. When we were finished, he closed the folder and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. You know, he said, in 30 years of practice, I saw a lot of people in situations that felt unwinnable. He paused. I never saw one handled the way you handled this. I had help, I said. You did, he agreed. But the help only works if the person at the center of it holds. A lot of people don't. In the afternoon, Webb drove me to the FBI field office on Capitol Mall for a formal witness interview. I sat in a room with 2 federal prosecutors and a court reporter and told the complete story of 14 months, every conversation, every document, every cup of tea in the careful linear way that the legal process required. It took 4 hours. When I walked out into the Sacramento afternoon, the sun was lower than I expected, the way it always is, after you have spent time in a room with no windows. Ruby was waiting in the parking lot, sitting on the hood of her car, with her jacket zipped against the November chill. She slid down when she saw me coming and fell into step beside me without saying anything, and we walked to my car together in the long, late afternoon shadow of the federal building. 14, she said after a while. 14, I said. She nodded once, tucked her hands into her pockets, then quietly, almost to herself. Mom would have been proud of you. My throat closed entirely. I kept walking. After a moment, I managed, she would have been proud of you first. Ruby looked over at me. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite tears, but the particular expression of someone receiving something they did not know they needed. We reached my car, I unlocked it, we got in, and we drove home through the Sacramento afternoon in the particular comfortable quiet of 2 people who have run out of things they need to say and are content for now, just to be in the same place at the same time. 6 months is a long time when you are waiting for something. It is also, I have learned, exactly the right amount of time to begin understanding what happened to you. The trial, or rather the series of proceedings that followed the arrests, because 4 defendants with 4 sets of attorneys and 4 distinct sets of charges do not move through the federal system, as a single clean event, consumed the better part of spring. I testified twice, once before a grand jury in January, and once at the sentencing hearing in May, where I sat in the witness box of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California in Sacramento, and looked at the 4 people who had spent the better part of 2 years treating my life as a financial instrument, and said what I had to say in the careful factual language that the court required. I did not look at Colleen when I spoke. I had decided that before I walked in. What I had to say was, for the record, for the 14 other victims whose names were read into that record, for the legal process that I had trusted and that had in the end worked the way it was supposed to work. It was not for her. The verdicts came down on a Thursday morning in May, 3 weeks after my testimony in a courtroom that was fuller than I expected and quieter than I would have thought possible. Colleen Marsh received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The charges attempted murder, elder financial abuse, identity fraud across 3 states, and conspiracy under the federal RICO statute. The judge read each count in a voice that gave equal weight to all of them, which felt right to me. They all had equal weight. Julian Drake received 25 years in federal prison, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. His attorney had argued for leniency on the grounds that Julian had been, in the attorney's phrase, an instrument of a larger criminal enterprise rather than its architect. The judge acknowledged the argument and sentenced him to 25 years anyway. Diana Cole, whose plea agreement had produced the complete operational records of the network, every transaction, every fabricated document, every target going back 6 years, received 12 years with the possibility of early release for cooperation. 14 families had answers because of what she provided. I did not know how to feel about that exactly. I settled on grateful because the alternative was complicated, and the families needed the answers more than I needed to be angry at the person who gave them. Richard Voss received 2 consecutive life sentences, one for the RICO conspiracy spanning 6 states and 14 victims, one for his role in the attempted murder of a 65-year-old man in Sacramento, California, whose name he had pulled from a public database and circled in red and handed to a woman he had trained to destroy people. The judge used the word premeditated 4 times in reading the sentence. I counted. When the court officers led them out, Colleen passed within 10 feet of the gallery bench where Ruby and I were sitting. She did not look at me. She had not looked at me once during the entire proceeding, which I had expected. What I had not expected was that the absence of her gaze would feel in the end like nothing at all. Like looking at a door that used to open onto something, and now simply opens onto a wall. Ruby took my hand when they were gone, squeezed once, I squeezed back. We did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say that the morning had not already said. The weeks that followed were occupied with the ordinary business of dismantling one life and beginning another. The chelation treatments for the arsenic had been ongoing since November, and by March, my neurologist at Sutter Medical had told me that the peripheral nerve damage, while real and permanent in some small ways, I would learn to live with, was significantly less than it might have been if we had waited another month. I thought about that sometimes, about the distance between where I was and where I might have been. It was not a comfortable distance to sit with, but it was a survivable one, which I had learned was all you could reasonably ask. I sold the Sacramento house in April. I had thought it would be harder. I had lived in that house for 22 years. Eleanor had planted the rosemary in the back garden. Ruby had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. But when the realtor's sign went up and the offers started coming in, and I walked through the rooms one last time on a bright April morning, with the light falling through the windows the way it had fallen through them 10,000 times, before I found that what I felt was not grief. It was readiness. We closed on August 14th. Ruby had already found us a place on Long Island, a modest 2-bedroom house 3 blocks from the water, in a town called Sayville, with a front porch that got the morning sun and a backyard that was mostly wild grass running down to a wooden fence. It was nothing like Sacramento. That was the point. We drove across the country together, Ruby and I taking 5 days and stopping when we wanted to and not when we did not. We talked more in those 5 days than we had talked in years, about Eleanor, about the years after she died, about the things I had gotten wrong and the things Ruby had carried quietly, and the particular complicated work of being a family when it is just the 2 of you and the world keeps asking more of you than you think you have. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon in August with 2 carloads of what remained of 40 years of living, and the first thing I did after we carried the last box inside was walk down to the water. The Atlantic was not what I expected. I had grown up inland and spent most of my adult life in the dry heat of the Central Valley, and the ocean, when I finally stood in front of it, was larger and louder and more indifferent than anything I had a frame of reference for. The waves came in regardless. The horizon held its position. The wind off the water smelled of salt and distance and things too old to have names. Ruby came and stood beside me. We stood there for a while without speaking, which was different from the silences I had learned to distrust. This one was full rather than empty, weighted with the good kind of presence rather than the absence of things. Then I remembered the letter. I had not forgotten it exactly. I had known it was in the bottom drawer of the desk, packed in the box, labeled study, miscellaneous. And I had known I would give it to her when the time felt right. Standing on a Long Island beach in August with the Atlantic in front of us and the worst of everything behind us, I thought, this is right. I took it out of my jacket pocket. Ruby looked at it. Then she looked at me. "I wrote it the night before they came," I said. "I wasn't sure I'd ever give it to you." She took it from me with both hands, the way you take something you understand is fragile, and turned it over. Her name on the front in my handwriting. She read it there, standing in the salt wind with the waves coming in around our feet and the August light going gold above the water. I watched her face move through the things the letter said. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes filled and spilled over, and she let them, standing straight with the letter held in both hands, crying the way her mother had cried, without hiding it, without apology, like a person who has decided that some things are worth the full weight of feeling. When she finished, she folded it along its original creases and held it against her chest with both arms and looked at the ocean. "He says he's proud of me," she said quietly. "The version of you who wrote this." "He meant it," I said. "So do I." She nodded, kept looking at the water. After a while she said, "What do we do now?" I looked out at the Atlantic, at the horizon that held its position regardless, at the waves coming in exactly as they always had, asking nothing of anyone, offering everything to everyone, making no distinction between the people who stood in front of them and understood them and the people who did not. "We live," I said. "That's what we do now?" She leaned her head against my shoulder for just a moment. Then she straightened up, folded the letter carefully into her jacket pocket, and turned back toward the house. I stayed a little longer. I thought about Eleanor, who had asked me not to let Ruby grow up thinking she had to be strong alone. I thought about the 14 men whose names I now knew, some of whom were still healing, and some of whom would always carry something they could not put down. I thought about Marcus Webb, who had spent 3 years building something patient and invisible, and had trusted me, a 65-year-old man with no particular qualifications for any of it to be the last piece. I thought about what it means to hold, not to be unafraid, not to be certain, not to be stronger than the thing coming at you, just to keep your feet under you and your eyes open and your hands ready, and to trust that the people standing beside you are doing the same. The waves kept coming. I turned and walked back toward the house where Ruby was already on the porch, already making it home. And I understood, standing there in the August light with the salt wind at my back and everything that mattered within reach, that the most dangerous thing in my life had not been the woman who sat across from me at breakfast. It had been the year I almost stopped paying attention. I would not make that mistake again. If there is one thing this family story taught me, it is this: the most dangerous betrayal does not come from enemies. It comes from the person who learned your loneliness and decided to use it. This is a family betrayal I would not wish on anyone. I was not a victim of bad luck. I was a man who stopped paying attention, who chose comfort over truth, and called it love. So, let me say plainly what I wish someone had said to me sooner: watch closely, not with suspicion, with clarity. The two are very different things. Every family story has a wound somewhere inside it. Every family betrayal leaves something behind that never quite heals the same way. But I have learned that what does not heal the same way often grows back stronger in a different shape. I believe God gave me Ruby, not just as a daughter, but as the one person who would refuse to look away when I needed someone to see clearly. That is not luck, that is grace. If this family story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs it. Leave your thoughts below. And if you are new here, subscribe. There are more stories coming. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories on this channel are built on fictional elements for educational purposes. If this content is not your preference, we respect that fully other stories await you elsewhere, and we will be here whenever you are ready to return.